Are your job ads actually driving away the candidates that you're looking for? And is AI making the situation worse? Words really do matter. Keep listening to find out why. Support for this podcast comes from Liza, a job ad intelligence platform that helps talent acquisition teams easily create high-quality, on-brand and compliant job ads. With Liza, teams can optimize job ads or create new ones from scratch, ensuring clarity, brand alignment, and compliance with pay transparency and local regulations worldwide. The first step of hiring is often the most overlooked, but it might be the point where the biggest drop-off happens if many qualified candidates don't even apply. TA teams are struggling with too few qualified applicants and too many unqualified ones. Liza fixes that by making every job ad clear, engaging, and compliant right from the start. To find out more, go to Liza.com. And Liza is spelled Lyser.
This is my show.
Hi there, welcome to episode 744 of Recruiting Future with me, Matt Alder. Recruiting Future helps talent acquisition teams drive measurable impact by developing their strategic capability in foresight, influence, talent, and technology. This episode is about technology and talent. Application volumes are continuing to rise, but finding quality hires remains a challenge. The usual suspects that tend to get the blame are candidates using AI, economic uncertainty, and a continuing decline in job board effectiveness. However, research points to a more fundamental issue that most employers are overlooking. The words in job descriptions matter more than most companies realise. Non-inclusive language is actually a key factor that stops many qualified candidates from applying. At the same time, regulations around pay transparency and anti-discrimination are proliferating, creating complex compliance requirements for job ads that vary by geographical market. Many employers are also outsourcing their job ad creation to generic LLMs that have more potential to amplify bias than they do to eliminate it. So, how should employers be using technology to ensure inclusivity, compliance, and a quality response from their advertising? My guest this week is Peel Burrell, CEO and co-founder of Liza. In our conversation, Peel shares research on how language shapes candidate behaviour, why LLMs reinforce bias, and the growing complexity of job ad compliance around the world. Hi, Peel, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Matt. So happy I can join in on this.
It's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you. Please, could you introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do?
Of course. So, first of all, thank you for the invitation as well. But I'm Peel Burrell. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the company called Liza. We help large organizations raise the quality, but not only the quality, but also the consistency and compliance of job adverts across languages, across markets, and across their brands all over the world. My background is actually in linguistics and behavioral research from the get-go, many years ago at this point. And before Liza, I co-founded another company called Develop Diverse with the focus on inclusive language and bias and stereotypes to make sure we can avoid that in recruitment communication altogether, and come with bias-free alternatives. And through that work is really where we came to Liza, because we built a massive data set showing that words and which words have a direct impact on candidate behavior. But for us, it's also about, we could also see that other things than inclusive language had a big impact on that. One thing is consistency across our job ads all over the world really affects the perception that a candidate has of the company and affects the employer brand altogether. But there's also more things. It's the structure, how the job ad is put together. We take all of that research and all of that foundation that we build with Develop Diverse and focus it on, put it out to larger companies, focusing on compliance as well. And maybe that's a little bit of a boring word just when you throw it out there. But today we are increasingly facing more legislation, increasingly complex regulation on the matter of job ads altogether, especially if you're recruiting internationally in multiple markets. So to actually make sure that no human should spend time on reviewing job adverts and securing compliance, we make sure that if there are any legislation, for an example, on paid transparency, do we need to include salary band or starting salary in job adverts? We'll ensure it's there. Every time we'll ensure that in Portugal we offer remote work, and we don't, because that's a legislation there. Multiple states in the US, you have to have pay as well. Sometimes there's even legislation on how the salary band, how much it can vary from starting salary to the top salary band here. So all of that is built into our engine basically, and that's what we support on in a fast changing landscape as well, because this is definitely evolving as well.
Talk us through your kind of methodology, your data, your research. How do you identify what's inclusive, what's not inclusive, and how important are humans in this type of process?
So humans are, if I can start with that, is the core of this. For both reasons, both because with biased language, so where we started in the research was, of course, with biased and stereotypic communication to make sure we can avoid it, because we know it has a huge impact on applicants. We actually found that it discourages 68% of qualified female, 54% of all qualified candidates altogether, and also 51% of all qualified male candidates. So it really has a huge impact, let alone there's a huge, of course, number here that we don't uncover because we've just looked at binary gender in this particular research. But we started way before. There's a lot of research already on this topic, both done in the US, done in Europe as well, that have looked at, of course, what are the biases, what are the stereotypes that we tend to have and hold about certain groups. How do we simplify them into stereotypes, and how does that in return affect both candidates but also just people who we hold this stereotype about, not because it's true, these biases, not because, let's just take an example. We have this stereotypic sort of expectation that all Germans are always on time, if we just take a positive connotation one. I think you all can imagine more negative stereotypes on that, but it's still a very simplified belief that we hold about a certain group of people that we tend to judge from, but that tends to actually be internalized by a group of people. So let's just take a more negative one with certain groups of people being always late. Then when we have let's just imagine that we have somebody from these demographic groups applying to us. It can also be about gender, ethnicity. It can be about, of course, social class, neurodiversity, age even, right? And physical disability. When we have someone apply to us, we'll sort them out. If we believe that, we know that everyone in Germany is always on time. We need somebody that's a bad example. Let's just imagine we have other groups of people where we believe that they're late. We will then sort them out because we need somebody who's always on time, even if we never met that person, but we simply judge them based on this stereotype. So we've looked at that, actually having controlled studies out in the real world, where we are both applying the stereotypic information and communication on that to see how does it affect candidates in the real world. And what we can just see is that when we are applying very stereotypical wording and phrases into our job ads, into our employer branding communication, it is especially negative towards underrepresented groups. So when we use words like strong, ambitious, we see less women, older groups, but also ethnic minority groups that it will actually apply here. But not because they're not strong or ambitious, but because they've internalized the stereotype that we have in society, that we've all grown up with throughout our lives. And in return, they'll look at our job adverts and they will never even apply because they don't have that. They have that stomach feeling that says that's probably not me they're talking about here. And so we really have based that on we mapped out all the stereotypes and biases that are in the world, basically, in a context about different groups. Map that out, use technology on top to actually figure out, okay, what are the wordings when we have a concept that is young, for an example? How do you describe that? What are actually the words we use to describe young people, older generation, older people, men, women? And we can do that by names as well. There's some word embedding techniques where we can actually figure out these, can think about it as a word cloud, basically a simplified way to imagine it. But a word cloud to say, okay, this the word that we use about certain groups. And then there's this connotation. I don't know if you ever did the Harvard implicit association test, Matt.
Yes, I have actually. Yeah.
So think about it a little bit, that's to uncover your own biases, right? But what we basically did was to take a little bit like the Harvard implicit association test and apply that on top of these concepts about the words that are used to describe young, older, men, women, different ethnicities, underrepresented, represented, and so forth, to see, okay, is it a positive or negative connotation at the end of the day? So we ended up with a huge data set here, and then we have humans sitting and annotating that into our system, and then we're going out in the real world with partners. We also had university partners over the years, but to actually test this with a control group of people to say, does it act? One thing is theory, but does it have a real negative effect on real candidates out there? And turns out it does. As I mentioned before, 68% less qualified candidates choose to apply when we use this type of wording, right? So it has huge consequences on that note.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting because we're going through a period where lots of employers are now using Gen AI to help them with their job descriptions and their job adverts. How are just the kind of the foundation large language models, how are they performing in terms of inclusive language and bias? What's going on there?
That's also what we see, right? We see often, I talk to so many both talent leaders and teams that are working on recruitment in different ways, and they all turn to, usually they have co-pilots and think, okay, but maybe we understand that ChatGPT can be biased and may not be performing the best, but we believe Copilot can do that because it may be trained on our own data set. But it's I'll get a little bit more into that, but it's basically the same model, right? It's the same foundational model that is used, whatever large language model we're going to. There are different models, but the way it's trained is a little bit of a black box, but we can assume it's trained on a big data set that is available, the public data set that's available out there. And that is just biased because, as before, human is really central if we want to design an inclusive hiring process and hiring process in general. What we do, we have human as the center. We don't have AI at the center. We have human at the center because humans are the biases. LLMs, large language models, are own biased because humans are biased. So we create the biases in the first place, and large language models just find the patterns statistically and will reinforce them. There was just a new study from a German university that also amplified this finding, but will just amplify it and reinforce the patterns to an even larger degree than before. So if we have a biased data set in the beginning, then we can never have some unbiased results. And that's why the humans that we have sitting on our end are trained experts, psycholinguistic experts that have been trained on the framework that we have built up from all the research, all the studies that we've done over the years, have annotated data to make sure we have a database that understands the concept of bias, understands what is exclusive, what is inclusive to which group, and make sure that we always understand that in the given context. And to get back to your question, because the large language models doesn't have that, it can never produce an output that is optimized for performance because it doesn't have candidate quality or candidate data from ATS, right? It can never produce inclusive results because it doesn't understand bias and the concepts, and it will not be able to produce compliant results because it doesn't understand where you're hiring and what are the laws within the given area, and it's not plugged into your ATS system or applicant tracking system to make sure that it can actually control what comes out there. So at the end of the day, if you're using large language models, whatever model you're using, and rely on Copilot, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, or any of them, you will compromise on the most important aspects, in my opinion, on writing a job advert. If it's not high performing, if it's not inclusive, and if it's not actually compliant and, follow the structure that you needed to follow and understand your brand, then it's just a creative piece of content without, context. And it won't. In the long run, I believe that the teams out there will see that. Even if it looks fun now and it's fun to play around with, they will understand that in the long run.
The interesting point there is that there are obviously organizations who are using, their own, kind of walled garden approach to AI. And, while they can control their data not going into the system publicly, as you point out, they've got no control about how those systems were originally trained. And I think that's a kind of really key point. And I guess that some people would think that, well, can I not just write prompts that tell the LLM not to be biased or to use inclusive language? And I guess that's not the whole solution either.
It's interesting. We actually we've done a lot of tests over the years because with the focus on job ads as well in our organization, it would be a lot easier for us and me personally if we could just make large language models produce high-performing job ads that are on brand, consistent, and, always inclusive. That would be great. That would be a lot cheaper for me instead of having a bunch of people annotating data, developing product, and so forth. But what we see continuously is just that the moment we hint a job advert, there are so many cliches coming in there. It just becomes a full-on, full of metaphors, full of cliches, jargon, and amplifies a certain stereotype again. So if you look at a sales role or even a project manager role, which should be more, a little bit more neutral in terms of stereotypes, it's just, it has a lot of masculine coded language, a lot of which is now, prohibited with the EU Pay Transparency Directive as well. But also in other countries, there are specific laws on, you cannot implicitly have gendered wording in any way. So if we just look away from the inclusive language being nice, so there is actual legislation on this. And if we leave it up to Gen AI or any of the other large language models, we are relying on hope as a strategy. We just hope it'll produce something that's nice. And it's really difficult for the eye to capture those biases or stereotypes. So even to see that it's not, compliant because we are busy. Recruitment is so busy these days. We're not exactly getting more resources into our organization. So we are busy. We are relying on technology to do a lot of our work, which we should, because there's a lot of work that can be done by technology. But we cannot allow them mistakes. First of all, because we can be fined if we're not compliant. But it's just if we're really investing in our employer brand, in our recruitment and job ads, we cannot allow the fragmented creativity that sometimes comes with ChatGPT and other large language models, and also Copilot, even if it's trained on our own job ads.
And I really get the impression that over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, we've seen a kind of a real increase around the world of, legislation about what needs to be said in a job advertisement or what doesn't need to be said or what can't be said in a job advert. And, to me, this seems like this is an increasingly complex area, particularly for, global teams who are trying to recruit across multiple countries. It really is getting more complex, isn't it?
It really is. And this is also where the landscape has changed dramatically internationally, actually. So whether you are in the US, in Canada, if you're in Europe, this is increasingly complex. So if you have a centralized recruitment team or TA team, you should be discussing this more. So one thing with Europe, for an example, we have the EU Pay Transparency coming into force. We have by June next year, in 7th of June in 2026, countries in the EU have to have national legislation on this topic that addresses that we cannot have implicitly gendered titles nor job ads specifically, and that we have to inform candidates about their salary prior to the first interview. It doesn't say it has to be in the job advert, but a lot of countries will then have to go out and interpret this and how they want to do it. And we already see in Ireland, we see in Lithuania, multiple countries that are starting to get ready for this, to make sure that it comes in the job advert. And my experience is that the leaders out there and the teams, they aren't ready for that. And how they will actually, do we then have a full-time person sitting looking through that all together? What do we do if that is the case? So a lot of leaders are sitting, and just waiting for the national legislation to be passed. A lot of it is going on right now as we speak, but we see clear tendency in Europe to make legislation specifically around titles, around the content in job adverts, and around salary transparency specifically.
Yeah, and I think in the US as well, salary transparency seems to be something else that's becoming increasingly important. At the kind of state level, certainly.
But in the US, there's more than 15 states already today, including California, New York, Colorado, Washington, Minnesota, where it's mandatory to have a salary in there. Right. And with California leading the game with fines on that if you're non-compliant on this, right? So it's about, how do we ensure? I was just, yesterday I have a large international organization as well, sharing an audit with them and, finding today that they have currently multiple non-compliant job adverts. I'm not going to mention the name, obviously, right? But then they weren't aware of because we don't have that transparency. We don't understand. It's really difficult. I won't say that we don't, because there might be someone out there that have the full transparency into the organization. But my understanding and what I see out there when I talk to organizations is really hard to control that quality of what comes out there for job adverts, either because we have, whether it's hiring managers that are allowed as well to post job adverts internationally and forgetting to use some templates, or TA teams, right, that where it's really difficult to have that quality assurance, because and that is really what we're working with, because it can be really expensive. If you have a $200,000 fine in the US because you did something wrong in California, then it's quickly not there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. From your research, what else have you found out about job ad performance that would be useful for people to learn?
So recently we did a report on this, actually. So we looked at thousands of job adverts with candidate data. So this is not based on my thinking or liking or any external data here. It's actually because over the years, we started back in 2017 with Develop Diverse. So over the years, we really have looked at and done impact reports for a lot of large international companies. So we know what is the correlation with the job advert and qualified candidates and the likelihood of you applying. So the data shows a clear pattern. The more structured and transparent a job is, the more qualified candidates will actually get in there. And it's, of course, important to have the differentiation between qualified candidate and non-qualified candidate. And it's also if we go back to sort of both the large language models a bit, but here, having the very structured, and when I say structured, is also about with what's in there as well is the clarity on that. So the highest performing job ads, they live up to 5 parameters. So the structure has a few things in there, but at the end of the day, it's the clarity that is in there. How clear are we about the job? How good are we at describing the task that you will be doing when you're in the job? How good are we explaining how the qualifications you actually will need to be taken into consideration? And secondly, we have the part that also goes to the structure. We have the USP, so an engagement. With USP, I mean unique selling point, the engagement, the selling points that we have in the job. Not overselling, obviously, but how good are we actually at selling it in how we're building it? And then the brand consistency. How consistent are we across? So that's what I mean with structure, these three. Because the moment, even if we have a really well-written job advert, if it's totally different than a similar job ad in the same market, then candidates will notice. It will be noticed that we seem like different senders, that there's an inconsistent storytelling about who we are as a company and what we offer candidates altogether. And that actually has a big impact. So that, and then of course the transparency, how we, when also talking about selling points, how good are we at being transparent, authentic in the way that we present ourselves and talks about ourselves. But of course, salary also does have a positive impact as, and we see more qualified candidates when we include salary in there as well, because then we are taking out all the candidates where it's either, below their expectations, understand that it might be too big of a jump from the previous or the current salary as well. So we actually are, with these parameters in mind in a job advert, we have the most qualified candidates, but we also sort out non-qualified candidates. And that's a big topic of many. I'm sure you hear that too, Matt. Topic at many, that people just want to, sort out the non-qualified candidates because the AI is applying, and have a lot of excuses. But if you ask me, the real reason, or a part of the reason, let's say that, because of course there are AI agents applying automatically as well for jobs. But at the end of the day, it also, a lot of it comes down to the fact that we are becoming more generic, more biased in our job adverts. And when we're doing that, we're also, when we're more generic, we're really including everyone, that everyone can see themselves in the job advert, because that is what large language models can do.
We are very fast to blame AI agents, the economy, everything, job boards, everything for, huge amounts of, not non-qualified response. But actually, you're right. The biggest tool is the way that the adverts are written, and I think that people really need to think about that and take more responsibility for that, because that could really solve not the whole problem, but certainly some of the issue. And I suppose, by way of summary, just give us a sense of what advice you would give to employers. What kind of processes should they be following? What tools should they be using? How can they kind of redesign the way that they, produce job adverts?
So I think there are two things. The first one is, if you would like to have more qualified candidates and less non-qualified, if that's actually a topic that comes up internally, my advice there would be to stop focusing on the symptoms, which is too many unqualified candidates. And then we are investing heavily in screening and assessment, which is what I see some companies do, not all, obviously. But then we try to get AI into automatic screening. We try to really save time there instead of actually looking at the cause of it, instead of looking at our foundation. Because at the end of the day, we use our job adverts. If you're doing headhunting, if you're doing whatever you do, you rely on your job ads. That's what candidates read when they decide whether they want to be with you or not. And if we don't have that right, and I don't see a lot of organizations invest in that, in that part, because none of us wants to write the job ad, right? That's why we get the large language models and GenAI to do it for us. But we need to realize that we need to invest in it. We need to either ourselves know what good looks like in order to write them, or we need to look to solutions that know what good looks like, that knows how we actually will attract the best performing candidates and the most qualified talent out there. And two, we need to ensure compliance, because this is a even if you use ChatGPT for your job ads and don't care about the quality of it, you will have to care about, compliance and whether you live up to the legislation in the markets where you are hiring. If only hiring in one country, of course, it might be a bit easier. But if you are hiring internationally, you will have to get yourself involved with that, and sooner rather than later, because this is coming faster than I think it will come as a surprise to many leaders that I talk to. So rather look it up now than later and understand the field, or, of course, connect with somebody who understands the market and have it mapped out internationally already.
Absolutely. And as a final question, what do you hope the future looks like for recruitment marketing? Where is all this taking us? What would you like to see the future look like?
I really want the future to look like focus on data-driven and performance-based communication, right? So I think right now, because of the large language models have taken a little bit into place, communication style has also changed, right? Whether it's on LinkedIn, I think we can all spot it. At least when I get a candidate, I can spot in 2 seconds whether it's written by ChatGPT or a real human. But the candidates can do the same, right? And everyone can do this. I would love that we focus on understanding what works for us and doing more of that. And then instead of using ChatGPT or any of these tech solutions, it looks all right and it looks creative. It has nice language and very colorful and very, a lot of adverbs, a lot of metaphors. But understanding that may not, the most creative job ad is not necessarily the best job ad.
Could not agree with you more. Peel, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you so much, Matt.
My thanks to Peel. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can search all the past episodes at recruitingfuture.com. On that site, you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, Recruiting Future Feast, and get the inside track on everything that's coming up on the show. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next time, and I hope you'll join me.
This is my show.